Hey there, Jacob. Thanks so much for your patience in me getting this critique to you. We're still getting caught up over the last couple months. Um, I assembled a little bit of your work here. It's looking good, and as far as the things that you want help with specifically, art specific and comic specific, I just have a couple of notes for you, and hopefully they can help you moving forward. One of the first things I wanted to point out was a little bit of anatomical, basically proportions, right? And what I've done here is, I've sort of drawn over here in my own personal style, right? I wouldn't fixate too much on like, oh, this is I'm not saying this is the right way to draw them, right? But just notice, right, if I pull this over to the side, proportionally, as far as humans go, we have a much, if we kind of put side by side the eyes, right? Here we actually, for one thing, we have a better eye line between the two characters in this panel. And as far as, let's bring her up to the level of the eyes. Phantom of the Opera style. And the same here. So we have a straight line from eye to eye on each of these. Proportionally, our face is ending a lot higher, right? It's not extending quite as far. This bit here, which is like sort of this concave thing happening, doesn't really happen too much on a real human, and so it's something we could use for exaggeration, but it doesn't really happen, and when it does, it's much more subtle than that. And so what ends up happening is there's a couple of different features here. We have this is something I'd watch out for. This eye is bigger than this eye. They're also not on the same sort of plane there, which we think along the lines of like, oh, well, this eye is further away, so it's going to be smaller. If you look and sort of do measurements on a real person, you'd have to have a lot of perspective, focal length or change in order for it to actually have a meaningful difference. They're so close together that you want them to be the same size, unless you're doing something like a zany Crash Bandicoot or, a character who's like very clearly has different sized eyes or like a big monocle or something, right? So that's one spot. Another aspect of this too, we have features that are sort of receding into the head behind the eyes, if you're drawing sort of a plumb line here. And on an actual skull, here's what's happening, right? We have a sort of oblong football shape for the head. We'll sort of shave down the side of it here where the side of the head. And from here we actually have like thinking of the skull, right? We have these two, let's do like a middle line here, right? These two spots for the skull, right? Two sockets for the eye. And around that we've got a little bit of brow bone and then cheekbone, right? Then we have the teeth, just sort of the bottom of this, and then the jaw underneath, right? Just in basic terms. So what's happening here from the side is that we have our eyes sort of behind the flat edge of this sort of forehead, right? And then we have like our nose, even the skull, right? This is this nasal passage or whatever right there. That's the start of it, and then cartilage kind of gives you more nose down there. But even there, right, that's coming forward in front of this sort of line if we do this. And the mouth as well is also doing this. So the teeth, the lips, all that stuff is all jutting forward. All right, so that's something where it's helpful to kind of have some of these anatomical proportions figured out a little bit more, right? And maybe we could do. You can always stylize, right? You can sort of push in a little bit more, maybe like right about there, depending on the person. But in general, that's something we want to do, is keep the lower, sort of the muzzle part of the head pushed forward from the eyes as far as depth is concerned. So a little bit of study of some of that anatomically might be helpful for you. So what I've done here, like obviously it looks like I drew it, right? But I'm not saying draw it like I draw it. I'm just saying get these more accurate measurements in there, okay? So that's the idea there. All right, I'll put that back. Let's see, up here, a couple just quick comic things, right? Here I did a little bit of a draw over of this character. Let's see. So here I just want you to see some of the, again, so this is along the same lines of anatomy. The way that we have sort of like this hair is just this single line there, and then it immediately meets with the body, and the body itself is sort of this like round bulbous shape. We're not getting enough detail there, and we also, like, even here, like once we, if we built out sort of this head shape, right? Let's see, change the color here. So let's say we've got our skull that we can build our teeth, our beard, our hair off of, right? And then we have our neck, and then our body. Even if the neck is really wide and they're, like a character with a shallow neck or not much of a neck, even then we have enough of a removal off of the body, right? Here we have this rib cage shape and then our pelvis shape. These individual pieces, right, which help us to like break the character apart a little bit, instead of a singular sort of tube, or sometimes like a bean is helpful for a certain level of simplicity, right? But understanding some of these things is going to help you, do something like this where, we don't normally draw characters on all fours, right? Human characters. So it's a little bit of a, like, it's, it's not a usual thing for you to draw. So it's going to be a little bit more difficult than something you just have sort of stored away in your mental library of poses, right? But something like this, and we'll get to gesture in a little bit, right? But this will help you find, like, okay, this is the spot where maybe there should be like a little bit of a dent, right? Here, where this line here, even if we kept things kind of the way that they are, I would still say, like, try and just the way that this works, like, have it arcing towards us instead of away from us, just because we get a really flat read of those shapes from that. Okay, here, this was just sort of like an appeal sort of thing. I removed kind of the irises, or what do you call that? I just made it so that you have just a pupil on this eye, right? And like a little bit more, curvature to some of these ears and stuff. I'm not going to completely redesign anything for you, but that was just sort of an idea, right? And as far as comics go, here's sort of the things that I have for you about comics. It seems like you spend a lot of time on like rendering, like kind of, I see like some painting stuff happening in here, to make this character look good and everything, which is, that's fine. But usually in comics, like, the same's happening here. Like, this is a lot of work to be doing over and over and over again, right? A lot of time with comics, you'll get simple or two-tone or like a very simple amount of rendering on a character for shading instead of painted, right? Just for economy. And what I'd like to see you do instead of spending so much time painting and having characters that are in very similar poses on very, very sparse backgrounds, is put some of that time budget into establishing more of an environment and context. I know environments are difficult and perspective and all that stuff is hard, but that's unfortunately the realm that you're in with comics. Is there's a lot of different things to learn with it, right? A lot of things that you have to do. I'd also love to see, from looking at some of your comics, right, more exposition or establishing shots. Like, where are these characters, right? Are they on a certain planet, or are they on near a certain city, or things like that, where we can we're not just getting like a Peanuts cartoon where it's just, yeah, they're out in the middle of a lawn somewhere. Like there's clearly some story significance to some of this, right? So even something like that where one panel per comic, like this one here, is, like let's say it's, for this one we have like a little bit more of a bit of perspective, and maybe it's not a room like this, so we'll do this, and like maybe we can see some of this mountain stuff in the background. You don't have to go crazy, like you could do some very simple and another point that I'd like to mention for you is body language, right? You have a little bit of it happening here, but like really moving the gesture and posing of the characters, which I'll talk about again with practice for you, which is gesture. So here we've got, maybe we have a character with arms crossed, right? We're just getting a little bit of the environment of what they're in. And it's maybe harder to render and everything afterwards, but like, that's a very simple pose, and then you just sort of correct things as you go from this. And removing that time that you spend sort of painting within a comic, right? You can put those things toward a more uniform look for things. And just a minor note, I would say that the panels being like two tones like this is a little bit distracting. I think either a pure white or a pure black, or of a very neutral looking tone would be helpful. Otherwise, the pink is like it's trying to tell us something, right? And maybe there is a story reason that I'm not grasping, right? But the simpler the better for things like that. It's either you're drawing attention to the panels and the panel lines and the gutters, when really the attention should be drawn toward your characters and their dialogue and actions, right? One last draw over is here. This is a nice look and everything. I've just sort of embellished a few things, right? We're doing a little bit more towards that standard head shape and proportions. I would sort of ding you here on the hand, right? Just hand anatomy, getting that down a little bit more. You want to be able to see a sort of a graduation at the wrist for most characters, a little bit of bump. Have a sort of square shape here. We've got our thumb is sort of an extra shape on the side of it, right? So things like that. But also, I'd like to see you, for one thing, that same idea of like the different sections of the pelvis and the rib cage, right? Here we have, this is me very, very quickly and sketchily using my own kind of shorthand. This is not saying you have to draw the same way as I have or messily as I have here, but establishing like a little bit, we're leaning into this this sort of line of action or energy or motion of the pose just a little bit more, right? He's sort of leaning towards this card and like the energy of showing it to someone, right? So something that will help you beyond just human construction and anatomy is one thing that would be helpful for you, the proportion and everything. But another thing is to just do something like a lineofaction.com or, some life drawing where you're finding the poses. And a lot of times it's like 30 or seconds or a minute that you end up sketching based off of an image of someone. And so what you do is you sort of like very quickly, you find like where the shoulders are, where the hips are, what direction they're looking, sort of like the eyes or the way that the head is turned, right? And you can fill in a bunch of this other stuff from there, right? You have a nice little shorthand. This is something we talk about in the Learn Character Design course a lot, of like sort of what direction their body is facing. You can embellish it a little bit, but I think especially early on, it's helpful to just replicate what you see there. And so something like this is very, very simple. We're trying to do it fast, just to understand the motion and energy, the curvature of the character, the way that they're balanced and imbalanced, right, where their gravity is. So something like this is over pretty fast, and all of a sudden we've got a new drawing to do. But you can see kind of from all of this how we immediately have this sort of, maybe it's not super accurate, like this leg needs to be a little bit longer or something, right? But on top of this, we can go back and correct over it. We can start adding sort of the musculature and constructed shapes back on top of it, right? So gesture, one more thing to work on, which kind of feeds into the body language, right? Not just drawing straight up and down characters, but then, having some motion and life to them really will help sell your storytelling, the acting, the facial expressions, all that stuff, right? All right, so hopefully that helps you. Please let me know if you have any questions, and take care. All the best to you.